You're exhausted, aren't you? Not just physically tired, but spiritually drained, emotionally flat, existentially depleted. You feel like you're running on empty while simultaneously being overwhelmed by everything. Endless content, infinite choices, constant stimulation that somehow leaves you feeling more hollow than before. You scroll through your phone feeling bored and anxious at the same time. You binge-watch shows that don't satisfy you. You consume experiences that promise meaning, but deliver emptiness. And you blame yourself for lacking motivation, for being ungrateful, for not optimizing your life correctly. But what if I told you that your exhaustion isn't personal failure? It's ideological success? Slavoj Žižek, the psychoanalytic provocateur who sees through every comfortable delusion about contemporary life, has identified what you're really experiencing: ideological burnout. The system hasn't just captured your labor and your attention. It has colonized your very capacity to desire, to hope, to feel alive. Your tiredness isn't weakness. It's the predictable result of living under an economic system that requires your spiritual death to maintain its own vitality. Žižek understands something that destroys every assumption about freedom and satisfaction. The proliferation of choices under late capitalism doesn't liberate you. It exhausts you. You're not tired because you lack options. You're tired because you have too many meaningless options and too few meaningful possibilities. The system has perfected the art of giving you infinite choices about everything that doesn't matter, while eliminating choice about everything that does. Think about your daily experience of choice. You can choose between thousands of streaming options, but you can't choose to live in a world without corporate media monopolies. You can choose between hundreds of consumer products, but you can't choose an economy that prioritizes human needs over profit. You can choose your personal brand, but you can't choose to live outside the logic of personal branding. You can choose your lifestyle, but you can't choose the social conditions that make certain lifestyles possible and others impossible. This proliferation of pseudo-choices creates what Žižek calls choice fatigue, the psychological exhaustion that comes from constantly making decisions that feel important but have no real consequences. Every choice you make requires mental energy, but when choices don't lead to meaningful outcomes, that energy is wasted. You become drained by the performance of agency without experiencing actual agency. But here's where Žižek's analysis becomes truly devastating. The system needs you to be exhausted by choice, because exhausted people don't have the energy to question why their choices are so limited. When you're depleted by endless micro-decisions about consumption and lifestyle, you don't have the psychological resources to make macro decisions about political and economic structures. Your exhaustion becomes a form of political pacification. The most insidious aspect of this dynamic is that it makes you blame yourself for your exhaustion. You think you're tired because you're not choosing efficiently enough, not optimizing correctly, not managing your decision-making processes well enough. But the problem isn't your choice-making skills. It's living in a system that uses the illusion of choice to drain your capacity for genuine decision-making about the things that actually matter. Žižek reveals that contemporary capitalism has achieved something historically unprecedented. It has made enjoyment mandatory, and in doing so, it has destroyed the possibility of genuine enjoyment. You're not just allowed to pursue happiness. You're required to optimize your happiness, document your experiences, and constantly demonstrate that you're living your best life. When enjoyment becomes a duty, it ceases to be enjoyable. Look at how this operates in your daily life. You're not just supposed to eat. You're supposed to have food experiences that you photograph and share. You're not just supposed to relax. You're supposed to practice self-care routines that you track and optimize. You're not just supposed to have relationships. You're supposed to work on your relationships, communicate effectively, and maintain emotional wellness. Everything becomes a project of self-improvement rather than spontaneous experience. This commandment to enjoy creates what Žižek calls superego anxiety. The anxiety that you're not enjoying your life enough, not maximizing your experiences, not living up to your potential for happiness. You feel guilty not for being too hedonistic, but for not being hedonistic enough. You worry not that you're too selfish, but that you're not practicing enough self-love. The pressure to enjoy becomes another source of exhaustion. Social media amplifies this dynamic exponentially. You're constantly exposed to curated representations of other people's enjoyment, creating the impression that everyone else is having more fun, traveling more, experiencing more, living more fully. Your actual experiences feel inadequate compared to the optimized presentations of other people's experiences. You become exhausted by the gap between how your life feels and how it's supposed to look. The result is what Žižek calls depressive hedonism, the condition where you have access to more pleasures than any humans in history, but feel less capable of enjoying them. Every experience feels contaminated by the awareness that you should be enjoying it more, documenting it better, extracting more value from it. Spontaneous pleasure becomes impossible when pleasure is always already work. One of Žižek's most crucial insights is that digital technology under capitalism doesn't just capture your attention. It fragments your consciousness in ways that make sustained thought, deep feeling, and meaningful action increasingly difficult. You're not just distracted, you're systematically prevented from developing the kind of consciousness that could resist the conditions creating your exhaustion. Your phone has become what Žižek calls the machine of voluntary servitude, a device that you carry willingly, but that serves to disrupt every moment of potential peace, reflection, or genuine connection. The constant stream of notifications, updates, and stimulation prevents your nervous system from ever truly resting. You're always slightly activated, always somewhat anxious, always peripherally aware of digital demands on your attention. This creates a new form of temporal experience that Žižek calls the eternal present, time that feels both rushed and empty, full of activity but devoid of meaning. You're constantly busy but never feel like you're accomplishing anything important. You're always consuming content but never feel satisfied. You're perpetually connected but increasingly isolated. The acceleration of digital time makes slowness feel like failure and contemplation feel like laziness. The fragmentation of attention serves a crucial function for capitalism. It prevents the development of the kind of sustained consciousness necessary for systematic critique. When your attention is constantly divided, you can't focus long enough to understand how the various problems in your life connect to larger systems. You experience symptoms without grasping causes, effects without understanding structures, personal issues without recognizing political dimensions. This is why Žižek argues that the real censorship happening today isn't the dramatic suppression of ideas, but the subtle destruction of the capacity for sustained thought. You can access any information you want, but you can't concentrate long enough to synthesize that information into coherent understanding. You can express any opinion you have, but you can't develop the kind of deep analysis that would make your opinions politically threatening to existing power structures. Žižek shows that one of the most exhausting aspects of life under late capitalism is the systematic privatization of what are actually social and political problems. Instead of recognizing that your tiredness, anxiety, and dissatisfaction are rational responses to irrational social conditions, You're taught to see them as personal problems that require individual solutions. Every form of social pathology gets redefined as individual pathology. Economic insecurity becomes financial anxiety that you need to manage through better budgeting and mindfulness rather than political organizing for economic justice. Environmental destruction becomes eco-anxiety that you need to address through therapy rather than collective action against corporate polluters. Social isolation becomes social anxiety that you need to treat through self-help rather than community building. This privatization serves multiple functions for the system. It channels political energy into therapeutic activities that don't threaten power structures. It creates markets for products and services designed to help you cope with problems the system creates. Most importantly, it makes you feel responsible for problems you didn't create and can't solve individually, which is psychologically exhausting. You spend enormous amounts of energy trying to optimize your individual response to systemic dysfunctions. You practice mindfulness to deal with anxiety created by economic precarity. You do self-care to recover from exhaustion created by exploitative work conditions. You work on your personal relationships to compensate for the social isolation created by community-destroying economic policies. All of this individual work is necessary for survival, but it's also exhausting because you're trying to solve systemic problems with personal solutions. The most insidious aspect of this dynamic is that it makes you feel like you're failing when your individual efforts don't solve problems that require collective solutions. When your anxiety doesn't disappear despite meditation, when your exhaustion doesn't lift despite self-care, when your relationships don't satisfy despite communication skills, you blame yourself rather than recognizing that you're trying to individually solve collectively created problems. Žižek identifies one of the most important but rarely discussed sources of contemporary exhaustion: the acceleration of social time under late capitalism. Everything happens faster than human consciousness can process meaningfully. News cycles, product releases, cultural trends, relationship expectations, career demands, all operate at speeds that exceed your capacity for thoughtful response. This acceleration isn't accidental, it's strategic. When events move faster than comprehension, you become reactive rather than reflective. You respond to stimuli rather than analyzing situations. You make quick decisions rather than thoughtful choices. This reactive mode of consciousness is easier to manipulate and control than reflective consciousness would be. The acceleration extends to every area of life. You're expected to have immediate opinions about constantly changing events. You need to adapt quickly to technological changes that transform how you work, communicate, and relate to others. You must constantly update your skills, your knowledge, your personal brand to keep up with rapidly shifting requirements. The pace of change exceeds the human capacity for adaptation, creating chronic stress and exhaustion. Social media amplifies this acceleration exponentially. Information comes at you faster than you can process it meaningfully. You're expected to respond quickly to messages, posts, and events. The conversation moves on before you've had time to formulate thoughtful responses. You feel constantly behind, always catching up, never fully present to any particular moment. This temporal acceleration destroys what Žižek calls the time of thought, the slower rhythms necessary for reflection, analysis, and genuine understanding. Without time for thought, you become what he calls a subject of reaction rather than a subject of action. You respond to what happens to you rather than creating what happens around you. This reactive mode is inherently exhausting because it puts you constantly on the defensive rather than allowing you to operate from a position of strength and clarity. One of Žižek's most devastating insights is that late capitalism has commodified the very desire for authenticity that would normally serve as resistance to commodification. Your yearning for genuine experience, real connection, and meaningful work has been captured and sold back to you as products and services. This creates a particularly cruel form of exhaustion. You're tired from seeking authenticity through the very system that destroys authenticity. Consider how authenticity gets marketed. Companies sell you authentic experiences that are carefully designed and mass-produced. Social media platforms promise authentic connections through algorithmic systems designed to maximize engagement rather than meaningful relationship. Employers offer authentic work environments that require you to perform authenticity as a job requirement. Even your resistance to inauthenticity becomes a market segment for authentic rebellion products. This commodification of authenticity creates what Žižek calls authentic inauthenticity, performances of genuineness that are systematically produced for consumption. You're taught to express your authentic self through consumer choices, lifestyle decisions, and personal branding activities. Your authenticity becomes another form of work. Work on yourself that must be documented, optimized, and monetized. The exhaustion comes from the impossible task of trying to be genuinely authentic within systems designed to commodify authenticity. You sense that your expressions of self are being captured and monetized, but you don't know how to express yourself outside those systems. You want real connections, but the platforms available for connection are designed to extract value from your social relationships. You want meaningful work, but jobs require you to perform passion rather than express it. This creates what Žižek calls authenticity anxiety, the exhausting sense that you're always performing authenticity rather than living it, that your genuine self is always slightly out of reach, that your real desires are being systematically distorted by the very attempts to fulfill them. Žižek reveals that the explosion of wellness culture represents the complete capture of the human impulse toward healing and transformation by capitalist logic. Instead of addressing the social conditions that create illness, stress, and exhaustion, the wellness industry sells you individual solutions that often make you more tired rather than more rested. The wellness industry operates by first making you hyper-aware of every aspect of your physical and mental state that could be optimized, then selling you products and services to address those optimization opportunities. You're taught to monitor your sleep, track your mood, measure your productivity, quantify your health, and optimize your performance. This constant self-surveillance is presented as self-care, but functions as a form of internalized management that never allows you to truly rest. Wellness culture also creates what Žižek calls optimization exhaustion, the tiredness that comes from treating yourself as a project that requires constant improvement. You're not just living your life, you're managing your life as if it were a business that needs to maximize its return on investment. Every activity becomes an opportunity for enhancement, rather than an experience to be enjoyed for its own sake. The most exhausting aspect of wellness culture is its promise that if you just find the right combination of practices, products, and mindsets, you can feel good despite living in conditions that naturally make people feel bad. This creates endless consumption of wellness products and services without ever addressing the systemic conditions that make wellness necessary in the first place. When wellness practices don't deliver the promised transformation, when you still feel tired despite optimizing your sleep, when you still feel anxious despite meditation, when you still feel empty despite self-care, you're taught to try harder, buy more products, or find better practices. The failure of wellness becomes evidence that you're not doing wellness correctly, rather than evidence that individual wellness cannot solve collectively created problems. One of Žižek's most counterintuitive insights is that late capitalism has created a situation where you have access to more stimulation than ever before, but feel more bored than ever. This isn't a contradiction. It's the predictable result of living in a system that provides endless stimulation while systematically eliminating the conditions that make stimulation meaningful. You have access to infinite entertainment, but entertainment under capitalism is designed to be consumed rather than experienced. You can watch endless content, but that content is optimized for engagement rather than satisfaction. You can access unlimited information, but that information is fragmented rather than integrated into coherent understanding. You can connect with unlimited people, but those connections are mediated through platforms designed to monetize social relationships rather than foster genuine community. This creates what Žižek calls stimulated boredom, the exhausting experience of being constantly activated but never truly engaged. You're always consuming something but never feel satisfied. You're always busy but never feel productive. You're always connected but never feel understood. The stimulation becomes a form of numbness rather than awakening. The paradox deepens when you realize that your boredom drives you to seek more stimulation, which increases your boredom, which drives you to seek even more stimulation. You become addicted to the very experiences that are making you feel empty. You scroll through social media feeling bored but unable to stop. You binge-watch shows that don't interest you. You consume content that leaves you feeling more disconnected than before. This cycle is exhausting because it requires constant effort without providing genuine satisfaction. You're always working to maintain your stimulation levels without ever achieving the rest that would make stimulation meaningful again. You become like an addict who needs increasingly higher doses of their drug to achieve decreasing levels of satisfaction. But here's where Žižek's analysis becomes unexpectedly hopeful. Your exhaustion contains within it the seeds of revolutionary consciousness. When the system can no longer provide genuine satisfaction, despite offering infinite options, when it can no longer create real meaning despite promising authentic experiences, when it can no longer deliver rest despite selling endless wellness products, then its contradictions become visible and its alternatives become thinkable. Your tiredness is not just personal pathology, it's political intelligence. Your body and mind are telling you that something is fundamentally wrong with the conditions of your existence. Your exhaustion is a form of unconscious resistance to a system that requires your spiritual death to maintain its own vitality. Instead of seeing your tiredness as evidence of personal failure, you can begin to see it as evidence of systemic dysfunction. This recognition opens up possibilities for what Žižek calls authentic action, responses to your situation that address causes rather than just symptoms, that work toward collective transformation rather than individual optimization. Instead of trying to manage your exhaustion through wellness practices, you can begin to organize with others who are similarly exhausted. Instead of seeking individual solutions to systemic problems, you can work toward systemic solutions to collective problems. The revolutionary potential of exhaustion lies in its capacity to reveal the gap between the system's promises and its delivery. When you recognize that your tiredness comes not from personal inadequacy, but from living in conditions that naturally exhaust people, you can begin to imagine and work toward conditions that would naturally restore people. This doesn't mean romanticizing exhaustion or refusing all forms of individual self-care. It means recognizing that your personal healing is connected to collective healing, that your individual restoration requires social transformation, that your authentic desires can only be fulfilled in a world organized according to different principles than the current one. So here's the truth that Žižek reveals through his manic dissections of contemporary consciousness. Your exhaustion isn't personal failure. It's the predictable result of living under an economic system that requires your spiritual depletion to maintain its own accumulation. You're tired because you're living in conditions that naturally make people tired, not because you're failing to optimize your energy correctly. The system benefits from your exhaustion in multiple ways. Tired people are less likely to organize for social change. Exhausted people are more likely to seek individual solutions to collective problems. Depleted people are easier to manipulate through promises of quick fixes and personal optimization. Your tiredness becomes a form of social control that you implement on yourself. But recognizing this isn't cause for despair, it's cause for hope. When you understand that your exhaustion is politically produced, you can begin to seek politically meaningful responses. Instead of trying to individually manage collectively created problems, you can work with others to address the collective conditions that create individual suffering. This doesn't mean abandoning all forms of personal care or individual healing. It means understanding that your personal restoration is connected to social transformation. You can practice self-care while also working for social change. You can seek individual healing while also organizing for collective healing. You can address your symptoms while also working on systemic causes. The choice Žižek presents isn't between individual wellness and political action. It's between individual management of systemic problems and collective transformation of the systems that create those problems. Your exhaustion can drive you toward endless consumption of wellness products and services, or it can motivate you to join with others in creating conditions that make wellness possible for everyone. The revolutionary implications of your tiredness become clear when you realize that you're not alone in feeling exhausted. Millions of people are experiencing the same depletion, the same emptiness, the same sense that something fundamental is wrong with how we're organizing social life. Your individual exhaustion connects you to a collective experience that contains enormous potential for social transformation. Žižek offers no easy solutions because easy solutions are part of the problem. The system that exhausts you also profits from selling you solutions to your exhaustion. Real transformation requires the kind of sustained effort and collective organization that can only emerge when people stop trying to individually solve collectively created problems and start working together to create collectively beneficial solutions. Your tiredness is not weakness, it's intelligence. Your exhaustion is not failure, it's recognition. Your depletion is not pathology. It's political consciousness waiting to be actualized. The question is whether you'll use your exhaustion to drive more individual consumption or collective transformation. Stop trying to optimize your way out of systemic exhaustion. Start organizing your way towards social conditions that make genuine rest possible. Your tiredness is telling you something important about the world you're living in. It's time to listen.